I would say it's communication, the ability to communicate effectively. And, part of that is understanding communication styles. It's such a simple concept that can have a really profound effect or impact on your day-to-day life, both work life, personal life. We have to understand that different people have different communication styles. In today's day and age, I say that I'm an old person, but think about the people that we work with, right? People of all generations. The way I communicate today is different than the way we communicated, 20, 30 years ago when I started in the industry. Now everything is an email or a text message or a Teams message. The way the younger generations, the people that we're hiring today, the way they communicate compared to the way we communicated when we started in the industry is just vastly different.
This is Facility Rockstars, the podcast that celebrates the unsung heroes of our daily lives, facility professionals. I'm your host, Jay Culbert. Join me as we honor these great leaders, sharing stories, insights, and expertise that empower us all to learn and grow together. Facility Rockstars is sponsored by Coludus, operating the way you operate in order to make your life easier. Welcome back to Facility Rockstars. I'm your host, Jay Culbert, and we have a very special guest to introduce you to today. He's a seasoned facilities and real estate professional. He brings a wealth of experience in managing critical environments, laboratories, and regulated sectors within the real estate and pharmaceutical industries. With a robust background in operations, he excels in people management and development, driving teams to achieve excellence. His commitment to optimizing facility performance while ensuring regulatory compliance makes him a valuable asset in any organization. Vice President of Facilities and Engineering at Breakthrough Properties, Pete Damiano. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Jay. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much for investing your time with us today. So, Pete, if you've watched the show or listened in the past, you'll know that I'm going to ask you, with all of your experience and projects you've done, positions you've held, what's been your biggest lesson learned throughout that journey?
Yeah, great. It's a great question. So for me, I would say it's communication, the ability to communicate effectively. And, part of that is understanding communication styles. It's such a simple concept that can have a really profound effect or impact on your day-to-day life, both work life, personal life. We have to understand that different people have different communication styles. And if you can understand those and use them to your advantage, I think it can make a really positive impact. In today's day and age, I say that I'm an old person. But think about the people that we work with, right? People of all generations, and everybody from, the way I communicate today is different than the way we communicated, 20, 30 years ago when I started in the industry.
And how do you mean, Pete? In what way?
Everything from just having a general conversation to talking on the phone, right? When we were growing up, that's how we communicated. Right? We wrote letters sometimes, as odd as that sounds, right? Now everything is an email or a text message or a Teams message or the way the younger generations, the people that we're hiring today, the way they communicate compared to the way we communicated when we started in the industry is just vastly different. And I think understanding that and working with that, we all have to communicate by email now or by whatever. So rarely we actually pick up the phone. I still do, but it's just not the same as it used to be. And people don't necessarily like to communicate in those fashions. Especially the younger generation. They don't want you to pick up the phone. Please don't call me. Just send me a text message.
Why do you think that is? We could speculate, I'm sure, but in your experience, what have you seen, heard, learned around that, and then the reasoning?
I think some of it has to do with just the way that people are growing up now. The internet, computers, just the technology that we have distances us from each other kind of physically, but socially brings us maybe even a little closer. But
Sure.
it doesn't always translate to different generations of people or people, even people from different cultures, right? There are people that don't grow up with these things that we work with. And I think understanding that and, communicating across generations, communicating across cultures, understanding the differences, I think, can make a big difference in the teams that you lead or in the teams that you participate on or that you work in. I think understanding people's preferred methods, if you're trying to get better results or you're trying to get, more out of something or someone, approaching it from a point of maybe I'm not communicating the right way is something to think about. It's something to dig into.
On that note, I think that's a really very critical point you just made. What I heard was basically adapt to the communication style of your audience or your team members or customer, whoever it might be, right? What are some best practices you've put in place with your team, Pete, to do that? Like, what are the prompts, if you will, or how have you coached your team or done it yourself?
So for me, I have some bad habits, right? I fall into bad habits that impact my communication, right? The way I communicate out, not necessarily the methodology, but maybe the timing. One is don't fall into your bad habits. And the first step in that is understanding yourself and what your bad habits are.
Awareness of our bad habits. Sure.
Right.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
One of my bad habits is I'm by nature, I'm a people pleaser, right? And I want to solve problems. And, sometimes I want to address the issue immediately. I want to go in and fix it and make it better. Sometimes it's better to raise a flag first. Say, hey, we're having a problem. And let everybody know that we're having a problem. And then you go in and start solving the problem, right? Like what we learn in our fire safety classes. What do we do first when we come across a fire? Hold the alarm. Meanwhile, I'm just grabbing the extinguisher and going after the fire.
Right. Yep. Yeah. Gotcha.
And I go back later and say, hey, by the way, we had a fire today. Not a great look. In facilities, in the facilities industry, we don't like surprises. And I especially do not like surprises. And I really encourage my team to communicate, right? So, hey, if you're having a problem, let me know. I can't help you if I don't know what's going on, right? So please communicate.
Pete, could I jump? I want to jump back because I think
Sure.
you illustrated to us that your style, you're adaptable. You've raised your awareness to your bad habits, as you called them, and communication style has to shift based on the audience or your team members. How have they done that for themselves? Are they learning from your example, or are there things in place to say, look, if someone doesn't answer an email, then go here, do this?
Absolutely. And honestly, we have the conversations pretty frequently on my team, not just now, but for years, right? It's important to lead by example, right? If you expect a certain level or for a certain type of communication from your team, lead by example, show them how it's done. Right. And if you don't have an opportunity to do that in a critical time, walk them through it, talk them through it. I had a conversation recently about, communicating with clients. And if we're trying to communicate a resolution to a problem, right. And I would say a lot of our client interactions happen face to face. Follow that up with an email, right? So communicating to them face to face, you don't know what's going on in their mind. What other things that they're dealing with that your 5-minute interaction with them may go in one ear and out the other because they're thinking about something else. So communicate the problem, communicate the resolution, whatever it happens to be, and then just follow up with an email. Hey, this is, for our conversation earlier, X, Y, and Z, right? Just lay it out for them. And it's also an opportunity to make that problem, spread the awareness of the problem to other people on your team, other people that may have resources that can help.
You just raised a point that I wanted to touch on too. We've spoke previously about, check my notes here. I think it was communication free flowing and across teams.
Absolutely.
And I don't know if that applies right here or if you
absolutely. Yeah. No, it does. It does. So, I mean, that's essentially the facilities team is the facilities team, right?
Mm-hmm.
You may have to work with property management. You may have to work with finance. You may have to work with, cross-functionally.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of different groups out there, and depending on the organization, the larger the organization, the more people. And I'm not saying, hey, you have to copy the whole world on this, but copy the relevant people. And, there may be a better solution, or there may be other awareness out there. Reach out. I do think, in communicating on teams, communicating across functions is important, right? If your team has the ability to communicate across channels, across teams, without fear of, hey, I shouldn't reach out. It's empowering to the employee, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's empowering to you, to your team, to say, hey, you don't have to call me if you're having an IT problem. You can go right to IT. Or if you have a question on, an invoice or a finance question or whatever, reach out to those team members, right? You're not necessarily breaking a chain of command to
Mm-hmm.
get to where you have to go. You're empowered to solve your own problems or work to solve your own problems, but knowing that you don't have to.
Sure. I mean, would you find that increases efficiency? I would think.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Good. So let me ask you this: when communication breaks down, because it's not always perfect, right? In any scenario, like how have you handled it, Pete? What are those scenarios that weren't as good, and how did you turn them around, or how did the team do it?
So, I mean, I don't know that I have a great example. And, self-admittedly, I am not the best communicator, right? I would say communication is not my greatest strength. And maybe that's why it's my greatest lesson learned, right? It's one of those things that I continue to work on to this very day, and the things that I find are my greatest strengths aren't lessons learned. They're things that come natural to me.
I think you're a little hard on yourself because you and I have communicated through Zoom, phone, text, and email, and I think you're pretty good at it. So
I've learned a lot over the past few years, but yeah, I mean, I think hitting it head on. If your team has a communication breakdown, hit it head on and just make a phone call. It doesn't have to be argumentative, right? It doesn't have to be, anything but hey, next time let's try it this way. Next time let's do it this way. We work in these organizations. Sure, we put policies in place, and sometimes the policy isn't. When you're in a crisis situation or a critical situation, policy isn't always at the top of mind. You can put a policy in place that, yeah, you have to, if this happens, you have to do this, and it doesn't always happen. So I think working through things, talking through things, communicating through things, on the practices that you want to have, it needs to be. It's a process of continual improvement until we all, would say until we all get it right, but there's always going to be a slip up here or there, and it's easiest to just hit it head on and say, hey, this is how we could have done this better.
Perfect. What advice might you give others who are listening around empowering the team if they haven't already done it or if they're struggling to do so?
Yeah, I would say, some of the best practices for me have been making sure communication is free flowing, right? Making sure everybody has a voice. Everybody, that there's no fear in speaking up, that you can share ideas. You can, hey, I open my employees up to me to vent. Hey, if you have a frustration with somebody and you just want to talk, you want to talk it through, you want to yell at somebody for a little while, give me a call. I'd rather you have the interaction with me than with a client or with a coworker that may not go as well.
And I love that. Bring it right to you first, and almost like, let's say,
Yeah.
practice it out or
Practice it out. Yeah, let's
Gotcha.
talk about it, right? And yeah, and I think that's a great thing. But
Hmm.
making sure communication is free flowing between not just you and your team, but between your team members and between teams, right? So across departments, across functions.
Mhm.
Empower your employees to reach across those boundaries and make the connections that they need to make, right? Even inter-company and outer company networking, right? You learn a lot of things from just talking to people, going to network events and whatnot. It sounds silly, but
Absolutely.
it's true, right? It's like, these are important things.
Well, they've had experiences outside of our company, outside of our lives. I couldn't agree more with you. That's very important.
Yeah.
Great stuff on communication. I wanted to move to resources too. And we talked about resources a bit in the past, and you had some great examples of, where companies, or at least your organization and others, may struggle a bit in terms of procuring resources.
Yeah.
Can you speak to that?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I don't think it's any secret that folks, that us in the facilities industry are seeing a shortage of skilled people, right? I've chief engineers, building engineers, HVAC technicians, plumbers, electricians, all the trades. It's like in the facilities industry, we're seeing just a really shallow pool of people that are out there and available to work, right? Over the last 30 years or so, fewer and fewer people are getting into the industry, and more people are retiring out of it.
Mm-hmm. Well, in terms of are there any, do you see any shifts in that at all? Or what are you seeing that's helpful to start getting people back into either interested in the trades or engaging in them? Or is it education? Is it opportunity within companies to advance?
I think it's a couple of things, right? I don't think over the past, let's say, just use the term 30 years, because that's as far as my history goes back in this industry. I think there's less and less of incentives to get into the industry, right? So think about hey, what's happened, in the last 30 years, what's happened? Major boom in computing and internet and those types of things. And I think that is where a lot of people went, right? That the industry is it's been seen massive growth over the last 30 years, and it's probably leveling out now. But I think that's where a lot of people that may have gone into trades in the past haven't, because there's no incentive to. I'd rather be on my computer than out in the field, in the cold and rain and whatnot, doing, working with my hands. I think that will turn around. I think we're seeing an increase in salaries. We're seeing, some of the benefits that are touted, right? Hey, this job comes with a pension. This job comes with better benefits and more higher pay, right? And I think I'm personally starting to see a little bit more of that now, that we really haven't seen in the past. I think it's going to take a while for that talent pool to kind of build, right? We're not gonna see the pain easing anytime in the next couple of years, but in the next few years, maybe in the next 10 years, most likely. And
sure. Yeah, without question, it takes time to shift.
Yeah.
So in your role, I have a question regarding the shortage. How does a company like yours in the real estate and pharmaceutical world tackle this challenge? How do you get around it? How do you solve for the fact that there may not be enough resources to get your properties up to keep them running properly?
Yeah, it's hard. So you have to be competitive, right? And we partner with third-party engineering firms that may have better resources, may have better connections. So we have had actually really great luck there. But even in the people that we hire in-house, you just have to be creative. When I say creative, you have to be more competitive.
When you say competitive, you mean in terms of how much they'll make, compensation,
benefits, all of that, really.
Okay. So you're utilizing a hybrid model, I'll call it, of third-party engineering firms, like you said, and in-house workforce.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So okay, so that seems like it's solving the issue while the industry starts to shift for you.
It is. Yeah. Yeah. And we have gone for long stretches of time with jobs posted, right? I would say let's say just over the last 6 years, there's been a number of times we've had a role like an HVAC technician or a building engineer, and we've had it posted for several months and haven't had, now luckily it's not like that was the one person that we needed to run the site. We've had shared resources amongst other sites, and shared resources, shared kind of teams really, but we've made it work.
I'm going to bridge a couple of your topics together here. If someone isn't in-house and they're not with you every day or they're not part of your organization, what, if any, challenges have you found communicating with the third party?
I can't say we've had a lot of problems in that area. Not none. But I think, establishing the communication in the beginning is important, right? Okay. Understanding where they're going to be on what day, who they're, so if I'm, sharing an engineer between two sites and those two sites are run by different people, which, done that a number of times, understanding, what's going on, setting an expectation, right? So, hey, when you arrive on site, check in with, whichever person you're dealing with that way, right? So they know you're here, they know what you're doing, you kind of set up what priorities you have.
Well, I like what you said. Yeah.
Yeah.
Establish the communication in the beginning. And by that, do you mean communicate, like you said, check in, with whoever they're reporting to, where they'll be, but also is it email? Is it phone? Like when something occurs, how do you communicate with them?
So a lot of times it's text or phone call, right? They're usually our technicians in the field aren't readily available for emails. So something more immediate is usually what happens if you're out in the field. But that first thing in the morning check-in is usually a face-to-face, as much as possible. It gives us an opportunity to say, these are what the priorities are of the day. I mean, imagine trying to type that out in a text in the morning. Right. You're getting a text, hey, this is what it's easier just to lay it out face to face. This is what's going on today. This is what we're working on. These are the things to watch out for. These are the clients that have, things going on or meetings that you should avoid or, Sure. So many different things that we could get into, but.
Makes sense. Yeah. Makes sense. Excellent. Well, and you mentioned that with the customers too. I like what you said about that, just to kind of button up communication a bit. With the customers, you'll meet face to face, and I like you said, and then follow it up with an email. Right? We discussed this, things may have been missed or forgotten, but you follow that up with an email and it kind of wraps the whole thing up and gives them an opportunity to say, no, that's not what I said, or yes, you nailed it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You shared something very cool with me in terms of innovation last we spoke, and I'd love you to share that with our listeners too, because, in the real estate world, in pharmaceutical and facilities in general, innovation is important. It helps us to become more efficient and move forward. So could you share that example with us and tell us a little bit about that, Pete?
Sure. Yeah. This was a while ago. So it's not, I wouldn't say it's a new innovation nowadays. I think it's been used pretty widely. But we, a few years ago, implemented a system called Smart Stack. And it's specific to, lab buildings and buildings that use a large amount of exhaust air. And essentially what it does is it allows you to reduce your energy consumption without reducing the amount of exhaust air your building needs. So in the pharmaceutical and research communities, in order to prevent contamination and re-entrainment of maybe contaminated air, you're required to have a certain stack velocity coming out of your exhaust stacks. And what Smart Stack does essentially is it allows you, if your fan system has what we call bypass air, if your fan uses bypass air to maintain your stack velocity, it allows you to reduce or, eliminate the amount or eliminate bypass air, because it continually monitors your exhaust for contaminants. And, in a lab building, the amount of time your exhaust air actually has dangerous contaminants in it is very, very low. So when there are no contaminants in the air, we can turn the bypass air all the way off, essentially, and ramp the fan speeds just to maintain the exhaust air that the building itself needs. So we did this. We were the first. I was, a part of the first building that did this in the state of Massachusetts, and we got some amazing incentives from the utility company. The project was not inexpensive, but had a payback of less than a year. So it was a really cool project.
That's a rapid return on your investment right there.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. And usually the utility company gets you to a 3-year payback, 3-year ROI. In this case, they because the project was innovative and it was the first one in Massachusetts, it actually got us a little bit more. Got us a very quick turnaround.
Congratulations. And for anyone listening, if they wanted to, like you said, it's been a few years and most are familiar if they're in pharmaceutical, but by chance they're not, how would they go about looking into something like this, Pete, and get it going in their building if they don't already have it?
Sure. Yeah. There's a lot of, I think there's a lot of resources on the internet now. I would just Google Smart Stack, to be honest. I think there's a local representation in Boston. I don't know exactly who it is off the top of my head. But yeah, there's a number of ways to go there. Reach out to me if you want. I can pull a little bit more information.
Perfect. Yeah, and at the close to the end of the show, we'll allow you to share your contact information so people can do that too. I'm going to take a left turn on you here and ask you a question about if you were to give advice to your 20-year-old self, say, "Hey, 20-year-old Pete, here's the advice I'm giving you, young man." What would it be?
Buy stock in Google and Amazon.
Smart man.
Hold on to it for 20 years and maybe you can retire. I don't know that I would have had the money at my 20-year-old self to invest in those things. But really my advice would be just be yourself. Don't put too much stock into living up to the expectations of everybody else.
Love that.
It's might not be in your best interest.
And have you found that, obviously you've learned that through your experience, and like, how would that have advanced? Had you known that when you were 20, what difference do you think it would have made?
There's a few things. I mean, honestly, I don't think it would have changed a lot in my professional life. Professionally, I've been really happy with the direction that I went. It was a natural progression for me. I think both of, my father was an electronic technician, worked with his hands his whole life. My grandfather was a little bit of everything. He was a machinist that did 100 different things over the years. Working with my hands was natural to me, but it led me to where I am today, right? Led me kind of into the management role, which I really love. I don't know that it would have changed too much in my professional life. It might have changed a few things in my personal life. But yeah, it's been good.
Great stuff. So I want to move to your piece of your education, specifically Mass Maritime Academy. And the reason I want to do that is for you to talk about it in your experience, but also a handful of people who have been on the show are also maritime grads. Tons of people in facilities and properties here in New England are also Mass Maritime grads. And I keep hearing the same thing from graduates from Mass Maritime. It's a community, it's a network, it's really tight, and it doesn't seem to go away. It only seems to increase from what I'm hearing, Pete. So if you could elaborate on how that's played out for you, how do you leverage it today, and what might others want to know?
I have to credit Mass Maritime with a lot of my success, right? I went to Mass Maritime many years ago and did not really know what I was getting into. 30 some odd years later, I couldn't be happier. It's been an amazing experience. The 4 initial years that I went there were great. I would say my first year was a eye-opening, what did I sign up for? But the rest of it, the friends you make, the people you meet, and the opportunities that present themselves are, if you take advantage of it, are amazing. And it's a very tight network. Right out of school, I worked on ships, so I was on oil tankers for a little while. And then
how was that experience?
It was great. It was great. There's the one thing that really made me stop is I could, for me, I could see the ceiling and I knew I wanted more than that. And so I sailed for not quite 4 years, about 3 years I sailed, and it was a great experience. Wouldn't trade it for anything. But I think I did it enough. And I think I got out of it what I needed to kind of move on to the next step, which was coming ashore. And, when I started looking for a role in Massachusetts, one of the companies I interviewed for was AstraZeneca Pharmaceuticals, and the person that hired me was a Mass Maritime grad. And, really opened my eyes to the network. And there's, over the following 24 years, it's amazing, right? That you meet people everywhere you go. I mean, because I'm in the facilities industry, I think that has something to do with it.
Sure.
We have maritime grads everywhere. Every state that I've worked in, we've come across people that have graduated, and the maritime grads usually maintain the network, right? So there's network events in Boston, there's networking events. I get messages from New Orleans, from Texas, there's network events around the country that maritimers just get together and tell stories.
That's intriguing to me, and it's so powerful. Why is that? Because other schools don't necessarily do that. What would you attribute that to?
It's a small school, and I think the experience that you get going there can be very bonding, but also when hiring through Mass Maritime, and a lot of times what you're getting, right? The education that they have, what you can trust. A lot of the times you can trust that you're gonna get a great person, right? Somebody that's been through it, that you get a little bit of everything at Mass Maritime. You get hands-on, you get theoretical, you get leadership, and I think the leadership piece plays a big part in it. It's a great school. It's one of the best educational institutions out there, as far as I'm concerned.
And I continue to hear that from so many different people. So credit to them for setting up such a great launchpad educational system, and it almost sounds like a brotherhood when I talk to people too.
Yeah, it's a family for sure.
Yep. So if someone isn't a Mass Maritime grad, based on your experience, what networking advice would you give them if they weren't part of Mass Maritime?
So like trade groups. So I think in the Boston area, AFE is very active. IFMA is very active, and you're going to find a lot of maritime grads in these groups as well. I think those are great ways to get out and meet people. Now there's a couple of others. I mean, you could, like things like BOMA, right? BOMA's the engineering side of BOMA is at least in Boston, is pretty active. I think that's a great resource. And just trade groups like that. I mean, they're all around the world, right? IFMA's somewhat international. There's groups, outside of that.
Yeah, that's great advice, and I'll tie it together. Ray T-Burge was on. He's the VP of IFMA Boston. He was on the show a few weeks back, and Andrew Delpreet, the Boston president for IFMA, will be on in a few weeks or it's sometime around there. So yeah, and that's I'm hearing a lot of the same there too. And I agree, IFMA is a great. All of those organizations are very good to get involved with.
Yeah. And there's others out there. So I was a member of AEE for a long time, the Association for Electrical Engineering. It's great for it if you're focused on energy conservation or those types of things. Lots of good groups out there.
Great stuff, Pete. We've learned so much from you. Can I ask you if I'm sure people will want to hear more from you, or at least reach out with questions. How would you recommend people get in touch with you?
Easiest way for me, I think, is just LinkedIn. That'll be the quickest and most efficient way to get my attention.
Is it Pete or Peter Damiano on LinkedIn?
Peter. On LinkedIn, it's Peter Damiano.
Peter Damiano. Okay. Outstanding. Pete, thank you so much for being on the show. It was a pleasure and a wealth of knowledge and information that you shared with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Of course. And everyone listening, thank you for investing your time. If you learned something, if you laughed, pass it on to somebody else. Recommend the show. And it's been another exciting episode of Facility Rockstars. We will see everyone next time. It's a wrap. Another episode of Facility Rockstars is in the books. Facility Rockstars is sponsored by Colutus, operating the way you operate in order to make your life easier. Until next time, facilitate and rock on.